Hey everyone, it's Alexander, the real Mr. Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and this is my review for 1961's Splendor in the Grass, which stars Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty in his first film, and is directed by Elia Kazan, who is most famous for On the Waterfront and being a prominent name in the Hollywood blacklist movement back in the day. So this movie takes place in the late 1920s, and while it focuses on two of these teenagers, played by Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty, it mostly follows Natalie Wood's character, Deanie, who is in love with Warren Beatty's character named Bud, but her parents are just constantly keeping her sexually repressed, and it just gets to a point where it drives her mad. And because this is a movie about teenagers in the late 50s / early 60s, it has to be a depressing drama showing that teenagers got it rough back then. And I mean that in the most literal way possible, because growing up, my idea of a teen movie is mostly a comedy. You'll mostly get gross-out comedies like Superbad or American Pie, but sometimes you'll get those very rare teen movies like Lady Bird or Booksmart, which are so much clever than most of the movies that come out. But back in the 50s, or in this case the early 60s, a lot of teen movies that you got are more dramas. And not only that, they can be really dark and depressing. One of the more famous examples back then is James Dean's Rebel Without a Cause, which also starred Natalie Wood. And this movie is kind of on that same level, except Natalie Wood is the main character this time around. And this is honestly a weird movie for me. Again, like with a lot of other classic movies that I've been reviewing this year, I watched this for the very first time, but this is a movie that I had literally no knowledge about. So I went into this completely cold. And I'm sure given the critical reception that this movie has gotten throughout the years, weird is probably one of the last words anyone would ever want to associate with this movie. So let me explain why I find this movie to be weird. I find it weird mainly in its plot and sort of the time period that it's set in. The plot is weird to me because it describes this teenage girl as being basically bullied or oppressed sexually by her parents and just trying to keep her like a good little angel. And I'm watching the movie going, her parents are not that authoritative. It's not like a Carrie situation where they are abusing this girl. And with Natalie Wood just going crazy and losing her mind, there are a few points where she just comes across as more of a spoiled brat than anything. And it's often pretty difficult to watch those scenes because she really does go to the point where she is admitted to a mental home right after she tries to pretty much drown herself, which there is some sad irony with that scene I'll touch upon a little later. And it goes to show that between this movie and Rebel Without a Cause, being a teenager in movies back in the 50s and 60s really sucked because your life is just like a total train wreck. And with Warren Beatty's character Bud, he's kind of put in a similar scenario as well. And there are a lot of things that happen in his life throughout the movie that are depressing as well. But he just never goes through that breaking point the way Natalie Wood's character does. And I don't know how else to phrase this film's plot, but just straight up weird. The one thing about this movie that actually really did bug me was its time period. This movie is set in the 1920s, and honestly, with the way this movie looks, there is absolutely nothing to even establish that this movie takes place back then. And this is an interesting thing to bring up since I just reviewed Some Like It Hot a couple weeks ago for the first time. With that movie, I had no idea that that was set in the 20s as well. But that movie has a lot going for it with its costumes and production design to where you buy into the fact that this takes place in the 20s. With this movie here, there are only really two indicators that show that this is in the 20s. One is Bud's old car, and the second is a plot device involving the stock market crash that led into the Great Depression. And that's about it. There's really not a whole lot in terms of the film's costumes or even production design that screams the 1920s. Now, it sounds like I've been bashing this movie a lot, calling it weird and criticizing the fact that it just doesn't feel like a movie that takes place in the 20s. But contrary to all that, I actually do like this movie, and there's a lot in it that I truly admire. Both actors in this movie are absolutely fantastic. This is Warren Beatty's feature film debut, and if you're a film buff, you obviously know Warren Beatty from Bonnie and Clyde, but if you're a younger person, you probably know him as the old man that read the Best Picture winner wrong at the Academy Awards. The year Moonlight won instead of La La Land. But with this being his first movie, it's a hell of an introduction, and he's very good. And his chemistry with Natalie Wood is pretty convincing as well. And Natalie Wood herself is just incredible in this film. I've always loved Natalie Wood, and knowing that this came out in the same year as West Side Story, which is my favorite musical of all time, 1961 was really a hell of a year for Natalie Wood. And as they pointed out in Turner Classic Movies, this was the year that kind of jump-started her career and showed that she could do more than just be a child actress. And she really goes through a lot of hell in this movie. You could tell that she is dedicated, and she completely sells you on the fact that this character is insane and is just going crazier as the movie goes along. To the point where, even though I said there are moments where she feels like a spoiled brat, you do actually feel sympathy for her once she actually gets admitted to the mental home. And even during the sequence where she nearly drowns herself. Which the sad irony of that whole sequence is that Natalie Wood in real life had a fear of drowning, and about 21 years after Splendor in the Grass came out, she did die of drowning. And I don't know if it's because in my mind I knew that Natalie Wood died of drowning, but that sequence where her character tries to drown herself is really rough. And it just goes to show that this movie doesn't really pull any punches. It feels very realistic. The scenarios don't always turn out the best for characters. And I had a long debate with myself about this film's message, on whether or not it was a good one. And ultimately, I think it's a good one, even if it's not a message that a lot of people truly want to hear. And it's the message that life isn't going to go exactly as you plan it. There's going to be a lot of bumps throughout it, and not everything that comes out of life is going to be very positive, but it's also good to try to make the most of what you have. Even if things don't go completely according to plan, try to make the most of what you actually have with you rather than what you don't have or you want to have. At least that's the message that I got with this movie. So in the end, this movie, again, I say it's weird, but it's still very good. It's definitely worth a watch. The performances are great, and not only from Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty, but the actress that plays Bud's sister in the movie is really good. Pat Hingle, who plays Bud's father, is really good, and if you're a Batman fan, you probably know Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon from the Burton and Schumacher movies. And like I mentioned beforehand, this movie is not afraid to go dark, and there's just a lot to admire about this movie. Would I watch this again in the future? Probably not, because of how dark this is. I mean, Rebel Without a Cause is honestly a teen movie in the 50s that I probably want to rewatch over this, and even then, that movie can get surprisingly dark as well. But Splendor in the Grass is still something that's worth seeing in your lifetime, because it is very well made. And I think the fact that I knew nothing about this movie going in definitely helped with my enjoyment of it. Even though there's a lot in this movie that did frustrate me and confuse me at points, I still think it's a pretty great movie regardless. And there you go, that's my review for Splendor in the Grass. And now I want to know what you guys think about the movie. If you've seen it, what did you think? Whatever the case may be, let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, leave a comment, support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until then, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.